All right, so without further ado, let's get started.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lisa Alvarado with Holistic. A little bit of my background, I'm the Director of Facilitation with Holistic, and actually good afternoon, this afternoon. In that position, I'm in charge of really helping our clients with all of our training offerings, determining what best suits their needs. And I also do DEI consulting with Holistic with our clients. I have a background in human resources and diversity, equity, and inclusion, really informed by my graduate studies and work on the history of race, gender, and ethnicity. And I found these things have, come to bear on so many of the issues that we're facing today and the historical roots of those issues that we're working on in corporate America and in organizations. So thanks for having me again. Thank you to 1871, and we're really hyped about this session. So on today's agenda, we kind of already covered about us, a little bit more about Holistic. We're a people data analytics company. We really take a look at the data to tell a story, to help us tell the story of what's going on in your organization, how employees are engaged, what's the employee experience, and a large part of that is a focus on DEI. We're here today to really focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion from the first stages of working as talent acquisition to determine how DEI, figures into your company profile. What are your goals and how can you guys help drive that process from the beginning? And we recognize there are a lot of challenges in that. And we're going to, offer you some solutions. So identifying where you are as an organization with DEI, what kind of challenges you face as recruiters and talent acquisition professionals, and then some tips and tricks on how you might best reach and source diverse talent. And finally, we'll also offer you some previews on some of the things like Holistic's pipeline analysis. These are the type of tools that we utilize data to determine, what's the best course of action and how you can move forward as an organization on DEI.
All right, yes, thanks for all the intro, Lisa. And I guess one last point I wanted to chime in on, obviously I introduced myself kind of early on, but I'm the founder of Hirewell and the co-founders at Holistic. And, really the challenge here and why we wanted to do this is, DEI is tough. It's a hot topic. It's a lot of companies, rightfully so, are making a push to improve, the diversity, equity, and inclusion in their organizations. And what we had Holistic do for my company Hirewell is start to train our recruiters on how to actually execute it. And I thought the training that they put on would be, very relevant. It's where, recruiters are, really kind of the key focal point for most organizations. If you're not diverse today, the number one area to improve that is obviously within your hiring processes, but that's easier said than done. And, we feel that, recruiters are really kind of caught in a challenging situation. So that's really the goal of what we're looking to talk about and what we're excited to go through.
So we'd say that the first step is understanding where your company is today. So you guys have decided that you want to, have a focus on DEI, or that's something, that's important for 2021. How do you determine that? So first, why are you diversifying now? What is the biggest challenge your organization faces when it comes to DEI and hiring? A lack of diverse candidates seems to be what the biggest challenge your organization is facing with DEI and hiring, as well as unsure of how to define and measure success, and then a lack of time for sourcing diverse candidates, recognizing that for sure in your role as talent acquisition specialist, speed, it really is the name of the game a lot of the time, fielding and finding the best candidates and getting to them quickly, as they are hot commodities in the market. We'll definitely have some discussions around how we can, help some of those challenges. So which aspect of your organization are you looking to impact most, right? How is diversity defined for you all? Are you looking to improve diversity within your company's leadership structure, improve gender diversity specifically, maybe racial and ethnic diversity, or another aspect, right? LGBTQ folks, veterans, employees with disabilities, or some combination of all of the above? Who's leading, who's the biggest driver of DEI initiative in your organization? So is it executives and leadership? Is this something that's from the top down? Or is it really something that falls on HR and recruiting, talent acquisition, to determine what you're doing around DEI and how you're doing it?
And this is probably the area we're going to talk about, kind of the most, or at least one of the kind of the key components, because I think one of the challenges that a lot of companies have is not everybody's on board. And, it's not to spoil kind of what we're going to get at, obviously, it needs to come from the top down, as Lisa said, but it needs to be, woven throughout your organization, right? Like the leadership needs to lead, HR and recruiting obviously needs to be integral in that, but then you need employees on board. And then specifically you need hiring managers. And I think that is kind of the challenge that we're going to talk about, kind of shortly.
Where do you stand? Where are you today as a company regarding DEI? Of course, we're beyond the, making the business case. You've decided as an organization that this is something that matters. But are you setting measurable goals around this? Are you utilizing inclusive language from the beginning of your, fielding candidates and job applications through onboarding in your employee handbooks, on your outward facing, materials? Where are you on DEI? And that's going to be integral to determining how you move forward, how you set goals, measurable and scalable, and how you meet them. And we will talk more to that coming up in the presentation.
So, I mentioned a little bit before, but the first challenge we see a lot of companies deal with is that the concept of not everyone being on board. The most common areas we see this are leadership isn't leading the way, or your hiring managers aren't on board. I think the leadership piece is what we want to talk about first, because I ultimately think your plan is doomed if you don't have leaders leading. The concept's simple. They need to do more than give a thumbs up. They need to be authentic. They need to invest time, money, and effort into it. And it needs to be kind of a personal component. Again, they really need to be leading the charge. And it doesn't have to be every single member of your leadership team, but there definitely needs to be that executive buy-in. The second concept, and as someone who's been in the recruiting and talent acquisition space, something we've dealt a lot is the hiring managers aren't on board. And it's less of they're openly resistant. It's the concept we see quite often is they love the idea, that they say they want to do it until it comes to their team. Some hypotheticals we see are phrases or comments like, I just want to hire the best person for the job. I want to hire someone from this particular school. Or I think the number one area we see is that, hey, I used to work with Tom. He'd be a great fit for this role. We need to move quickly because he's got 2 offers and we can't let him slip through the cracks. So, and as a recruiter in a talent acquisition professional or HR, like I feel your pain on this, because, your job is to find great talent for your organization, right? And on any given role, like there could be the need to absolutely work quickly. But, it just, what I think we find too often is that same line is uttered way too many times, and then that becomes the recurring problem.
Right.
So the solutions, they're simple on paper. They're a lot harder to execute in real life, but it really comes from the top down. Success is driven that way. Again, it comes from leadership. They're the ones who are pushing for hiring managers and everybody to do these things. They need to have the right reasons for it. They need to understand the impact on their business and having diverse teams and the values of that. Like the nice thing is when we did this, Tom and I did a variation of this presentation about 1.5 years ago, and it was really a different message at the time. We had to lead this off with why companies should diversify, basically making the business case for it. I think the exciting thing over the last 1.5 years is that's less the case, right? Like I think most companies, and I would guess just about everybody on this panel or on this presentation, recognizes, all right, our company, like business success can be driven by having a diverse team, a diverse set of ideas, different ways of thinking, and it just drives more innovation. So, but it takes more than that. Again, it takes the leadership to lead the way, be on board, and ultimately take charge. And then they can drive, like the influence that the leaders or the CEO or the founders have is just you can't match that anywhere. So it's not always easy if they're openly resistant or just don't see the value, don't see the time. It's not an easy concept, but it's definitely one that you need to continually convey and push for. And that trickles down to the second part, and again, specifically how you address the concept of, oh, we have to move on, on Tom because he's great and he's going to be off the market and I have to hire him. Listen, on occasion you may need to do that. Like there could be the perfect person for this role, and he is too good to pass up, or she is too good to pass up. But if your organization takes that approach every single time, that's how you just perpetuate the problem. And something we'll talk about in the sourcing component is a lot of the challenges that we've seen when we look at pipeline information and pipeline data is that employer referrals, the demographic consistency of employer referrals match to a T what the demographic components of your organization are. So if you rely, and we're not saying don't rely on employer referrals, because clearly they're an important pillar to your your talent acquisition strategy, but it does mean slowing down the hiring process. Commit to interviewing a set number of diverse candidates per role, and just adhere to it. I mean, especially if it's something where you're going to hire a bunch of something, sure, you might hurry on one candidate and kind of push that person through the process, but that just does not need to be the case every time. And if it is the case every time, that's where you have to have those hard conversations and say, we cannot do what you're asking us to do from a diversity perspective if we're constantly going through a fire drill and just rushing one-off candidates through the hiring process.
Mm-hmm.
Anything you wanted to chime in on that, Lisa?
No, I definitely think that was super comprehensive, and we'll talk to that more, but that slowing down the process, and that's an area where we'll talk about defining some of your DEI goals, but that's going to vary from organization to organization on what your determination is on how and when you will ensure you include a diverse candidate in your candidate pool, whether that means making sure you're not putting forth a pool of candidates until at least one meets a diversity standard, or more specifically, if you want to, really dig down on goals about percentage, like we want to make sure X% meets a diversity standard to help us meet our overall organization-wide defined DEI goals.
Yeah, and I know I'm looking through the Q&A, and I know the last question is kind of around that concept. On a one-off basis, it is hard to, like, if you have the perfect person, and if they don't, if they fit the role and they fit a lot of things that your company is trying to do, but but they don't, they don't meet an inclusion standard, they don't do what you're hoping. Again, on a one-off basis, like you can obviously, you can kind of make exceptions, but the kind of the goal that we encourage for companies is just really commit to it, make it part of your outreach, practice. Like we'll talk a little bit about the sourcing component in a few slides about how to just thoughtfully do this stuff. Again, like the concept of diversifying takes time. It's not a quick fix. And so you just have to commit to it.
Thanks, Matt. So when we, first did the first poll about what was the biggest pain point that you all, or challenge you're recognizing internally, it really was, how do we define and measure success, right? Like, what does this look like? We're talking about DEI things, but how is that affecting us? What does that mean for our organization? And how do we get better? How do we make improvement? And so there are a couple of things. The keys to that are identifying your company's current state, right? What is, the current makeup of your organization? And we definitely have a poll question on that. Do you know the current demographics of your organization?
So I was quicker with the polls this time, Lisa. So it is up, all three are up and running. So yeah, keep going.
Sure. Next, analyzing the industry and geographic trends. So for instance, for your three most important roles, know the individual demographic information by industry and location. That's going to give you the best idea of who's in the marketplace for those roles, and then how you can bring those candidates aboard. The next poll, do you measure diversity at any stage of the hiring process? So evaluating your pipeline data, looking at the demographics at every stage of the process, from your application to the initial screen, interviewing, and to offer. And then finally, defining DEI goals. And that's part of our poll. Do you have defined goals around diversity hiring? Do you have those goals as an organization in general, but any specifically regarding to recruitment and hiring?
But the numbers so far are interesting. I mean, they're frankly across the board, and I think they speak to a lot of the challenges. Like I saw in the Q&A, somebody had asked about measuring, how do you measure employee sentiment around DEI? There's a million ways. I mean, pulse surveys, or kind of annual or semi-annual employee surveys are typically the easiest one. it sort of depends like where you're at in the evolution of your DEI, journey as a company is, I guess, is how I would put it. The more sophisticated you are, like the more you're going to want to measure and kind of analyze how everything's going. But again, it ultimately just kind of it takes time and really you want that grassroots buy-in from people within the organization, because we talked a little bit about the sourcing component of the candidate identification, and in one concept that I know both Holistic and Hirewell have utilized is how do you flip the script on employee referrals? Like, you still want that to be the number one channel for how you bring on top talent, but it's you tie these goals into your employee referral programs and just really push people to what we see a lot, and especially with which I think the 1871s kind of like the people who are part of this tend to be tech-driven, tech-enabled companies that are largely millennials, and in general those are organizations that this is extremely important stuff to them. So I'm obviously making a bit of a generalization, but I think you'll start to see that is it tends to be a pretty important or kind of vital part for those people. But again, you figure out how to measure it, and pulse surveys are easy. You can talk to people sort of one-on-one and just kind of share a little bit more of like the it's less, it's more qualitative when you do it that way, but it's, you want to hear what people think, and that's how you create great workforces for your people or for your company. So we'll share the results. Lisa, you want to roll through these?
Certainly. So we saw for, do you know the current demographics of your organization? Yes, for the majority of you, 71% responded that is something that you track. Do you measure diversity at any stage of the hiring process? We've got almost half say no, that's not something that's currently measured. And then a split between about a quarter of folks saying that it's measured at every stage, which is great, and the goal. A smaller percentage, 10%, where whom we interview and whom we hire. And then finally, yes, but only people we hire. So it's definitely across the board, as Matt said, and we can talk about more ways that and some tools that Holistic has, we will be sharing with you today on how you, develop, find this data, you pull the data and determine what it says and what it means for your organization. And then, do you have defined goals around diversity hiring? This is a huge one. 81% of participants said no, right? 19% said yes. And I would, take a bet that of that 81%, many of you are working at organizations where this conversation has come up, whether it's through HR or from leadership of diversity is important. You might even have on your website, that, or on your job postings, that you're committed to the DEI and inclusive, in work environments. But if you haven't set specific, measurable, scalable goals around that, it's a great thing to say, but a hard thing to measure over time and to see progress made, right? And we've had some, questions also about how can you track what data should we be tracking, what to do with it, and then how do you measure success? And we'll talk to that a little bit more as we move forward. So Holistic has a suite of services to help you measure each of these things, from identifying your company's current state to analyzing the, where you are in the market, what are the industry trends and geographic trends, and then evaluating your pipeline data at every step of the process, from getting together those candidate pools all the way to offering and hiring and onboarding folks. And then finally defining what the DEI goals are for your organization and how you're going to seamlessly weave those through every section of your process from the beginning. So here you see, this is one of Holistic's tools where we help you to identify companies' current state of diversity. So this first step in the process is really to take a horizontal look across the organization to determine the representative diversity of your org across a series of lenses. So here in the picture, you see an example, a sampling of gender. What does gender look like? What's the makeup in your organization? Racially or ethnically? What portion are people of color? Depending upon your organization, we can get down to a granular level, where in this particular instance, it specifically lists white, Black, Hispanic, mixed, Asian. Depending on the diversity, sometimes people of color might be in a bubble if it's a much smaller percentage. Age, and then even business title, vertically across the organization, what are your different bands as you go? And then the data will tell us what's your gender diversity been like over the history of your organization and then where you sit currently. And these are obviously the first steps when we're talking about the end game being setting some DEI goals. Where are we now? Let's determine that first.
One thing I'd add on this, there's been, there's obviously, the push for transparency and the push to share kind of what, your data looks like is growing, but it's also being, you hear stories about being, gamed by various companies where, I've heard a few different times, like some of the big, tech companies out West, switched various kind of employee classes and where they were, contractors in the past, where they made them employees to amp up their numbers. We're not, this conversation is not about that, but listen, there's things like that are happening. And I think the value of taking the lens like this is you want to see it in a various different groups. I mean, sure, it's nice to know the gender diversity of your organization at a high level, but you want to be able to look at it at all these different, through these different lenses to understand what it's like for your engineering team, what it's like for your marketing team, what it's like for your HR team, or what it's like for leadership, or what it's like in the Chicago office versus, the New York office. And that's where you start to see some trends and because it's never, employee experience and DEI is clearly not a one size fits all challenge. And so you want to be able to figure out where you do it well and then, replicate that in other areas, but then also identify where there's could be some, some challenges bubbling up and getting ahead of them.
One question that Gary had in the chat was if we suggested measuring demographics at every stage, from at applications, should we be asking candidates to disclose their race and ethnicity early on? When we're working with our clients, that's definitely a switch we do think that they should turn on in their ATS systems from an early stage, just in the same way that we're going to talk about sourcing and us going out to specifically look for diverse talent. It's really important also to understand what type of talent you are attracting, whom is applying. And, sometimes that in itself can give us an idea of what kind of things we need to work on in our diversity goals around branding, around who's attracted to our organization to begin with. From there to then determine what moves and steps we need to take in order to reach more diverse folks. Great questions, Gary. In this next thing, so once we've determined where you are as an organization, the next step is obviously to figure out how do you rank against your competitors? Who's in the marketplace and who's competing with you for talent? So in this top graph here, you're going to see on the left, that's the makeup for competitors. So but for racial diversity in your specific industry, this is the majority of how these companies are made up. And then when you've got that mirrored against what your organization looks like, sometimes that's one of the first places where you can see these are opportunities for growth. These are areas where we might have some challenges and we might want to put some of our focus. So one of those key competitors, challenges, to identify competitor demographics as well as a demographic representative of your company in each area. This in essence is what the market looks like, right? This is who you might expect to apply for the jobs and who's competing with you for talent. It's one of the key biases that we combat is this notion that there are not enough candidates out there, or we're doing as well as we can given the marketplace. And while folks who work in talent acquisition, HR definitely have a decent understanding about these things, if you're setting measurable specific goals and you recognize as an organization DEI is somewhere you want to focus, this is not something you want to do on a hunch. This is where it's so important to have the data and the science behind it so you can be purposeful and recognize, okay, so now that I've seen where we mirror against, we stand against folks in the marketplace, how do we rank in that? So for company X here, we can see on the bottom how across the industry, these are specific companies to that industry, they are ranking about third. So maybe they are doing a lot better than, and depending on if you haven't ever taken the data, you might not know. You might think you're doing great. You might be down at the bottom. So it's really good to measure these things.
There was a question, how do you get this information? And the short answer is not easy. There's more being shared publicly. So like, for instance, like a lot of the big tech companies are starting to share this. So you can kind of look at they'll release transparency reports, as well as like the big consulting firms tend to do a pretty nice job of it. That's part of what Holistic does is to, aggregate this data and then, share the benchmarking, because, quite simply, it's not a simple thing to do. But then the other side is, some companies will look at their their competitors. Some care less about that, and they just want to know like what the market looks like for their area. And that's a little bit more readily available. Like there's, you can, like census data will share, kind of what, the easiest one to do is for like computer science and STEM graduates, because like you can look at anytime there's a field that has, such a high propensity of people in it to have come from a specific degree or series of degrees, you can then look at the number of graduates in those areas, and it's going to paint a pretty nice picture. So again, we've shared some public information around like computer science graduates or STEM grads in general, and and the numbers there, it takes a long time for those to change over time, but they've been pretty consistently like 18 to 20% female, and then like 35 to 40% racial or ethnic diversity. Lisa sort of touched on this when she talked about how do you measure the various aspects of the your hiring funnel. Again, as a recruiter, your ATS is oftentimes a necessary evil. They're getting better, and they're starting to have better tracking and better data and better reporting. I guess the better reporting is kind of hit or miss. But basically the concept we have here is just taking a stage by stage view of the hiring pipeline and process. And so, again, if you have, like, this is specifically what Holistic measures, but, realistically, you could take the same concept where, if you turn on the EEOC reporting within your ATS, like you should have this information. Now, not every candidate is going to answer it, but, what we find is that most do, and it paints a fairly nice picture. And so what this, dashboard that Holistic has created basically tracks it at every stage. So it starts at the top of the funnel, and that's how we always treat, hiring is it's a funnel, right? So you have applicants, and then you have, the various stages of your process. And really what we're looking for, and then the examples we share here are, based on this example, it shows that, females accounted for 51% of the applicants. So what you want to see is that they also represent 51% of the hires or better. And so this example shows that it is actually better, right? So, that starts with 51% applicants, but then 54% of the people who do initial screen are females. And then 56% of people who are on-site interviews are females. And then 56% of the people who are getting offers from your organization are females. And then 57% of people who are joining are females. So that's the sign of, positive numbers where, your organization is doing better as they progress through the process of, bringing on and pushing forward, inclusive, candidate slates. And then, and so the tool list that we're showing basically then adds filters where you can check by department, you can check by various, you can change it to race, or you can change to race and gender if you wanted to do it. So again, this is just, it's just about every common ATS has this ability now, and that's the most common way that we have done it, and we've encouraged clients to do it. All right, so then this is the second part, and this is another tool that Holistic has developed, but it's basically the concept is calculating projections and goals based on your data. So, based on the poll we ran, setting goals and managing goals are extremely hard. And quite frankly, a lot of companies are reluctant to do it because they just don't know how. And it's a terrifying thought to really put yourself out there and say, I'm going to do this, and then adhere to it. But, people set goals in every other aspect of their business. And, without goals, it's just really, really hard to, hold anybody accountable and figure out if you're doing it well or not. So basically, this is just another tool that that Holistic has developed, where you take where you're at today. I mean, it's you read it from left to right. Obviously, you can look at the historical numbers of your organization, and then you can see where they are today. And then you can, by playing around with the numbers, all right, great, we're going to be, you factor in. I mean, there's only a few variables. Obviously, it's people who join the organization, people who leave the organization, and then what the demographics of those people are. So the concept behind it is, all right, how aggressive do we want to be? And that's sort of the concept that that we take when it comes to goal setting. It is not everybody wants to be, right? Like maybe you want to be, all right, yes, we want to improve on this, but we want to conservatively manage towards this. And it's like I said, it's a big step. This is something where the concept of getting buy-in from the whole organization, you need it here, because if you don't, like, they're going to be real apprehensive to to publicly state any sort of goals and then stick to them. But ultimately, we think that's a sign, and something we'll talk about in the last part about making sure that your organization is seen as a place that diverse talent wants to work at, because that is, I personally think that's one of the biggest challenges companies face. I mean, sure, it's difficult. I mean, there may be, maybe hard to attract them, but it's even harder to get the ones that everybody's trying to hire. When you have Google saying they're hiring tens of thousands of, they have a diversity hiring initiative to hire tens of thousands of people nationwide, that's who you're competing against. And let's face it, they have more money, more resources, and everything than the rest of us. I'm trying to read this question. It's a long one on the EEOC and greenhouse. I'm going to have to come back on that, if that's okay. And we'll keep going through. Yeah, and I guess that gets this challenge 3 that we talked about. It's more work to diversify your pipeline. The concept of choking off your pipeline, saying I only want to see candidates from these top universities, or I want to see somebody whose GPA is 3.5 or higher. These are common things. Not every organization does it. I feel like it's become a little less prevalent than it used to be. But back at one point in time, I guess you still see a little bit about it. Like you'll see on social media, like these VC firms where they'll ask for what school you went to, but there's only 6 choices, and basically MIT, Stanford, and then 4 Ivy Leagues. So that's a classic example of choking off the pipeline. For all of everybody on here who would think as a recruiter, the real concept, or how do you want to encourage as broad and wide of a pool of prospective candidates as possible. And as soon as you start adding limiting factors, it just it so drastically decreases the sample size that diversity becomes nearly impossible. And so the solutions to this are just not placing unnecessary parameters on your search. You don't want to reduce the candidate pool, and then kind of some other things it gets into, the sourcing component. Like you don't want to artificially decrease it more than you have to, especially for, super challenging roles. But then you also, you want to start to flip the switch, and how do you start thinking about attracting, more diverse candidates? And kind of 2 things that we'll talk about. I mean, the one is, if your company has employee resource groups or ERGs, like, they need to be vital in your, in your recruiting strategies. I mean, you play up the concept that you have ERGs, I guess, in the first place, but then also empower them to be more involved in hiring and tapping into, their networks. And then, some of the things we'll talk about next are the, creative sourcing techniques that we think are important, and, they can take some time, but, if this is a priority, this is important, it's something you're going to do, or you're going to see the value in investing in.
So thank you guys for being so engaged in all of your questions. We are going to try to make sure we make it through to get some time for question and answer. Now we want to talk about some sourcing tips and tricks to locate diverse talent. So the first of those, I say to partner proactively. So, having partnerships, making partnerships with graduate, professional, Greek alumni associations. And I say proactively because, as we've talked about previously, we understand that doing this work of identifying the best candidate, it's a rat race. You're under the gun, particularly when you find a very successful candidate, someone who you feel like they fit the bill. This is what we're looking for. We go after that. And in those times, that's when that diversity, portion, that DEI focus kind of gets left behind. So if we're working to proactively, not just, when we're specifically looking for leads, make these partnerships, those are things we can lean on or go to. That's another well that we can go to when we're looking to cultivate, a candidate pool. Searching strategically. So using targeted Boolean searches to get specifically to the candidates you're looking for. For instance, searching for pronouns when you're looking to source female candidates. If you're going on LinkedIn or something like that, instead of just using all of those filters, that's very hard to navigate, put in a pronoun, and you're going to find specifically individuals who identify themselves as female and may meet a diversity metric you're trying to meet. Getting creative. So going beyond your usual job boards, your usual posting sites, thinking about doing things like searching and meetup groups, right? Lots of professional organizations have meetups. Obviously now we're in COVID and work from home times, but a lot of these things are going on remotely still. Searching for Slack channels, right? So we've got so many channels specifically related to, Asians in STEM, Blacks in tech, women who code, all these type of hashtags and Slack channels. And then association list, having list of different types of associations, professional organizations that might be by gender specific or racial or ethnic groups, and making sure that's something that you keep updated, and in that proactive piece, knowing who's the best person to contact, having those contacts set up so that when you do need to look for talent, you are able to access it. And then finally, expanding our DEI definitions. We know that diversity is so much beyond race and gender, but so frequently when we hear leadership or we as HR talk about it, that those are the groups, really thinking about differently abled folks, members of the LGBTQ plus community, veterans. Age is a big one that we don't always talk about, is ageism, and certainly intersectionality, right? So we can meet multiple ones of these different diversity metrics at the same time, depending upon who we are sourcing and who we're bringing into our candidate pools.
Yeah, that's great, Lisa. One thing, I sort of touched on the previous slide, but, it's, again, I obviously have some pretty strong beliefs on recruiting and talent acquisition in general. And, any company that thinks it's just the recruiter's job to hire and no one else's is going about it the wrong way. And this is, even more paramount in the DEI hiring space. And so, it definitely takes a team, effort, because again, I know think about if you're the only recruiter in your organization, you're already doing 7 jobs in one, like to do all these things and all these proactive measures is tough. And so that's where you really need that organizational buy-in and, empower other people in your company to do this sort of stuff. I know I saw one question on the chat around, employer referrals and how that impacts, organizations. I mean, again, like the data we've seen, like employer referrals, if your company, like, not only do you want to track, the flow through of candidates at all stages, or, through every, at every stage, but you really want to do it by source too. Like, and you want to double down on sources that aren't finding A, top talent, but then B, diverse top talent, or I guess I should flip those orders. So there's a lot of components to it. You really want to track it, but again, empowering your employees and sort of giving them this sort of a playbook to do some of this and kind of be creative is valuable. And again, I'm sure your organizations have employee referral programs, so you are paying them to do this sort of stuff. So leverage their networks and leverage kind of their creativity to do some of this stuff for you.
Mm-hmm. So now talking with more specificity around building those proactive partnerships for diversity. I have listed here, many of the different groups that I've, brought up previously. And some of them, it makes total sense when you're thinking about, okay, if I'm looking to source specifically, Latino folks, I'm going to look towards some of these organizations here. ASE, for instance, the Hispanic Alliance for Career Enhancement. It's a professional development organization for Hispanic professionals, but also a great place to source candidates. Or if I'm looking specifically for a Black engineer, NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers, is something that's, got a national network as well as local affiliate chapters in major cities. That's a great place. But something that might not jump off the pages you so readily is to make a relationship with an organization like the Urban League. This is a organization for Black professionals. It's over 100 years old, focused on economic and job security for African Americans. And when I say it's not as, it might not have jumped off the pages to you, I mean, when in the same way that when we put too much of a filter on who we're looking for as a candidate, while it's awesome to make a relationship or a partnership with an organization that's specifically for Black engineers, if you get in front of or get a partnership with something like the Urban League, you are going to get in front of a multiplicity of folks. These are professionals who are in law, in medicine, science, education, nonprofits. And so it's like you're getting a lot more meat out of a single partnership. And also it's something that has a very strong national network that you can tap into. So just being super creative and thoughtful about these partnerships. And in the same way that we talk about setting DEI goals as an organization, a lot of those might be bigger goals. You can set smaller departmental or individual goals. So a lot of the time, the reason that we don't get to do this diverse work or do these hires is because it takes time, it's extra work, it's another step. So being proactive and saying, okay, obviously I can't, make connections with every one of these subsets all the time. Maybe set a goal once a quarter that you're going to make a focus on, we've really not done too much with veterans in hiring. And I think I want to really, I'm in tech, I'm going to reach out to Code Platoon and find out some of the great things that they're doing to get veterans into these type of tech roles. And so once you've done that, over the course of a quarter, by the third quarter of the year, you'll really be setting yourself up in a great place with feeling like you've got organizations who are already out there doing this work, who are serving these populations, and just creating some synergy between your org and theirs, so that when these roles come across your desk, you can say, well, let me call up Matt. I know that he knows what's going on with Code Platoon. Just being really mindful and thoughtful about the ways we can do this and being creative.
Yeah, that's great. So, the challenge 4 is attracting diverse talent. And I think this is, it's tricky, right? As I said before, there's a lot of companies now that, have this as an initiative, and, it's like, it's not a simple kind of, all right, great, let's do this and we'll solve the problem. I mean, it takes a cohesive sort of well thought out approach. And I think the challenge that many of you may be facing is, again, like you're going, against organizations like a Google who, they've got a whole team around DEI that could be bigger than, whatever your entire HR department at your company or whatever you want to compare it to. So it is, it's kind of apples and oranges, but it doesn't, it shouldn't, I say it to let you know what you're up against, but not to deter you from it. Because of course, like a grassroots approach and really focusing on these concepts will pay off. And so, again, you really want to pay attention to who's doing it well. And I really suggest that at the corporate level, but, just kind of follow who, a variety of people, follow, places that are out there, network. I mean, there's, the beauty of HR and TAs, there's just a lot of network availabilities, ranging from SHRM to, Disrupt HR and all these different places, and, Slack channels. There's just places to really dig in and ask these sort of questions. But, from there, I mean, when you're trying to do this yourself, there's just some keys to success, and transparency is number one. I can speak to, sort of just challenges we've had as an organization. I mean, we've done an okay job at Hirewell of diversifying ourselves. We've reached, we're 50% females, but we are still continuing to struggle, drastically increasing our racial and ethnic diversity. But, I mean, you can't hide from that. I mean, be transparent. And that's where I think sometimes of, talking about your organization is doing, or sharing those goals, and just, kind of doing, just whether it be monthly or quarterly, sharing your, DEI journey, I think is valuable. And one of the tools that, Holistic has that Hirewell uses is, we call the transparency report, or, public facing report, where just, give people a little bit of snapshot behind, the scenes at your company. What do these numbers look like? There's no reason to hide from it. And I think by talking about what you're doing and where you're at today, where you're trying to go, and how you're going to get there, that'll resonate with people. And I can guarantee, we don't have any statistics, but I think it's something like, 67% of, candidates that meet an inclusion standard are doing this sort of research on your company. And so God knows how they're finding it, because a lot of it isn't, readily available. So the more you share, you can at least start to control the narrative and show people, the positives about what you're doing. And, it also applies to leadership. They need to be authentic. They need to discuss their progress, discuss why it's important to them, and, and share that information. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it. Obviously, your website's easy and the simplest, but then there's, I mean, social media, there's some, there are some good things about it, and being able to speak to people and share this information, it is one of the positives of social media. And then lastly, and this is kind of a no-brainer that we sort of gloss over, because I think at this point, people recognize, all right, like, we want our job descriptions, we want our job postings to really tell a story. I mean, but just look at yours. I mean, you think about how most companies write their job descriptions is just, they start with one they had from 2 years ago, they just recreate it and put it out there. Like, that's something where you want to emulate other people's, what they're doing, and trying to give a little bit of a, behind the scenes, don't just add the sentence at the bottom where, around EEOC, or that, you don't discriminate. Of course, I mean, that's like, you want it to be more authentic and kind of more real than that. But, again, in the simple manner is also just, running through those bias filters. Like XGO is a big one, or there's, free ones where you can just make sure that there's nothing in there that will, discourage people from applying. Another key point with job postings is, if you're struggling with gender diversity, it's very proven, and there's tons of data around, men being much more likely to apply to a role that they don't, qualify for, where women will only apply if they, are a perfect fit. And so that gets back to kind of overly ambitious parameters that aren't necessary. And if that's choking up the pipeline at the top, like, it's a dangerous battle. You want to make sure that you're not doing that. All right, this one's me as well. Okay, so, how we can help. I mean, obviously, we appreciate everybody joining, and a lot of these concepts we think you can quite easily do yourself, but there's some that sometimes it makes sense to tap on, some external resources to help. Just kind of a few different ways between the two organizations that we'd love to help. I mean, HireWell has an offering, called Managed Recruiting, where we combine our process of what we built from a DEI recruiting process, and incorporate some holistic tools, and basically measure a lot of these different things that we talk about, where, we just kind of embed it into what we do and how we do it, and kind of share data throughout the process, and it just kind of helps make it a little bit easier. Some other concepts is we've done more, specifically, diversity sourcing projects. So we've, again, developed some technology with Holistic to, basically drastically increase the targeted talent pipelines. And it's, it's the numbers, show, typically 50 to 75% more. And it's basically looking, say you're using an example of, like, we're looking to hire software engineers. The technology will basically take, like, kind of lists we have, and give high probability that, the people on a particular list will be, meeting an inclusion standard. And then there's, a couple of things Holistic does. I mean, there is, the holistic DEI analysis, or the pipeline analysis that we, talk about in a second. But the DEI analysis really helps you, measure where your company is today, and, the various aspects of, there's kind of three key components to it. There's, what are your demographic, what are your employee demographics right now? What are kind of the policies and procedures, and is your company set up to truly grow and welcome an inclusive, diverse workforce, and then continually measuring employee sentiment around those different things. And the last one, and this is kind of the free thing that we're offering, and we obviously list Lisa's contact information if you're interested. But the pipeline analysis, like, it takes a little bit to set up, but assuming you have the EEOC data set up, like, that's a free tool. We'd be happy to, or we will offer it free to people who are on this, if they want to email in and check it out. Like I said, it's a pretty interesting thing to look at. The real value is obviously looking at over time, and then trying to juice the various outcomes based upon where you're struggling or where you're doing well. But definitely get in touch with Lisa if you're interested, and gladly offer that to all of you. So yeah, I know there were a bunch of questions. I mean, hopefully we tried to answer things as we went through them. But I know there's probably some more that we missed. So feel free to chime in. I see there's the ones around the greenhouse. Wait, does anyone know use greenhouse and not have that thing of all the EOC questions? So, I don't know that, and I'm not sure if anybody wants to chime in, around how they've sort of tailored greenhouse to capture the EEOC data. But I guess what we'd love to hear is if somebody has an answer, please chime in. There's a couple things we will, we're going to be sharing the recording. We'll be sharing the deck with anybody who's on this. Gladly, you walk you through it. And, we'd love to take some of this stuff offline. And I think kind of what we want to have happen, back when in a world when we were doing all these events in person, it was kind of nice where people could network after the fact. And I think that's unfortunately the one real downside of what's going on, all these things over Zoom. But, I think we'd love to figure out how to do maybe a more kind of intimate, whether it be lunch and learn or, kind of an idea sharing, because, there's no simple answer to any of this stuff, but I think it's, kind of a combination of best practices, really the key to success.
Actually, Sheila came in the chat and she said that for first I'll say the question, because I think we only could see it as panelists. The original question was, they utilized Greenhouse as their ATS, and when they had it turned on to collect demographic data, or excuse me, the EEOC data, it gave a disclaimer that they were a government contractor. And so she had, the individual had candidates kind of had an adverse reaction to that. And so they've now turned it off and they're no longer collecting that data. So a potential workaround, one of our consultants from our team, Sheila's let us know that one of our clients uses Greenhouse, then sends a subsequent DEI or EEO data survey to applicants. So it's not necessarily perfect because it's not capturing that information at the time of application, but it's a second step so that we still have an attempt to collect that data. So there are different things and add-ons that sometimes we have to utilize depending upon your system. But hopefully that answers that question or gives you another option. Oh, sorry, that was Tom. Tom, our CEO of Holistic.
Everyone's logging in as Sheila, but yeah,
Sheila's Zoom name. And so also our tool can also estimate demographics. That's right. So when we're working and collecting data with the client, there are definitely going to be holes or gaps in the information, but our tool is able to create a realistic estimation on the information that we do, based on the information we do have, to fill in some of those gaps.
Yeah, that sums it up pretty well, Lisa, where, in a perfect, we kind of look at demographic data collection in a few ways, like clearly getting employees to self-identify for, whatever you're doing at any stage, whether it's the ATS or once they join your organization, is clearly the preference. The second option is we, when we'll run surveys, we'll collect, anonymous demographic information from that, which will help. But then the third option is, if those aren't possibilities, we will use this tool, which estimates both, gender diversity as well as racial and ethnic diversity. And I think it gets to about 3 or 4% accuracy. So it's quite good. It's not perfect, but definitely makes a huge help. And then I see, okay, so yeah, so Kat, you added for Susanna, and that was sort of what I thought. If you're doing government subcontracting, you need to track this information. So it almost seemed like that was it seemed like that might have been just like an out of the box customization that was sort of standard, but hopefully could be changed. So this last question is a good one, and I think like what we, a lot of what Holistic's put together that's great is just toolkits and resource centers. As we said, there's no simple, like, all right, great, read this book and you're gonna have all the answers. But like, it's just kind of, it's the concept of educating yourself and looking at a lot of different, avenues. I mean, I know there's 3 or 4 Slack communities just around diversity that, I think some are Chicago specific, some are national, that are great. But I think that's something that, we will gladly share, is just, hey, here's some great resources, who's doing it well, what are the different, are there people to follow on social media or LinkedIn that are good? Are there Slack channels to subscribe to? Like, I think that's a great thing that we will start adding to the different, resources that we put out. And, and then I see, Kat, that last question from Carrie. I think that's, you just answered that one, right, Lisa? That's how we use the tool, the Holistic tool to measure. Like you basically just, it measures or estimates demographics based upon kind of the names of the people who are applying. All right. Well, thanks. Like I said, I appreciate everybody joining, and in terms of, so this was a fairly long one to have, a good number still on. We'll pass the hour point. We appreciate it. And it's, it's nice to see. We all long for the day when these are actually, on site at 1871, and we can be a little bit more collaborative. I personally hate just speaking into a computer and hope that people are paying attention, but I guess we're all used to it at this point. So thanks again. Lisa, any kind of last information?
I just wanted to, thank 1871 again for giving us the opportunity. And also, please do reach out to me at lisa@holisticindex.com. Anyone in attendance today, we are willing to do a free cursory pipeline analysis for you. That was the data slide showing at every stage of the process how DEI is showing up from your candidate pool through your offering, and any other questions or other ways that we might work together with your organization or team. You can reach us, and we would be happy to assist you. We will have a recording available, and so I'm sure that's something that we can make available to everyone who registered.
Yeah, we'll send it along, and here's on my screen is the example of what this pipeline looks like. That it has the filters to track by various stages or time periods. So yeah, so thanks again. Appreciate everybody joining, and look forward to helping out however we can.
Okay, thank you.
Bye everyone. Thanks.